Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the MMA for having us. It's really quite a topic, this conversation around CMOs being better aligned with their CFOs. I'm sure many of you in this room are currently dealing with the budgeting process, the annual budgeting process. I know we certainly in our organization are. So in opening, I think one of the things that we focus on at Deloitte is trying to drive and help shape the C-suite agenda. Now, typically you'd think of us as a business that only speaks to the CFO, and for the most part, that's reasonably accurate. However, I lead a practice called Deloitte Digital, and we're very much focused in on how we help our CMO C-suite executives advance the agenda of marketing. So I'm going to just quote a few statistics before we get into some discussion with Beyers and Katherine, and some insights as well. So recently, Google and Kantar spent some time with a number of Fortune 1000 company execs, all at C-suite level, and had a very deliberate dialogue around where they see misalignment and where they see opportunities for greater alignment within their organizations. And overwhelmingly, the most critical alliance that came out of the conversations was that of the alliance between the CMO and the CFO, the spender and the purse string holder. So we've been looking at this and studying this intricately for the past 18 months, the dynamics between CMOs and CFOs, and the ability for them to either be the greatest of enemies or the most powerful pairing in the organization. We believe that they are most definitely the most powerful pairing in the organization when it comes to driving the growth agenda of the organization. So when you look at this relationship, what are some of the tensions? And I'm sure that many of you will have very distinct recollections. Certainly I do as a former CMO, having to sit and justify my presence, it felt, let alone the budget that I was asking for to a CFO. And quite often, a lot of the tension sat not so much in the fact that we were not aligned from an objective perspective or a KPI perspective, but it sat in the fact that we just didn't really understand the language of each other. Whether it was me as a marketer or, as I speak to, CMO clients of mine, just saying, we're presenting this thing, we're not getting traction, we're getting pushback, we're getting asked a lot of questions. And often, similarly, when we speak to CFOs, they're saying, we don't actually understand what marketing is delivering. We know what it's spending, we know what it's doing, we know what the tactics are, but we don't know what it's doing in the business. We don't know what impact it's moving, what dial is it moving. Yes, we're seeing results, but we're not sure what part of the marketing equation is driving which result. And so that's kind of the common thread that we've seen, is this gap in language and vernacular that exists between finance folk and marketing folk. But to make that a little bit more practical, before I get into the practical examples, another stat. So a recent Forrester survey had asked 150 US B2C marketing execs what their most challenging priority would be over the coming year. And 71%, which is a massive stat, I think Di also had a stat of over 70%, 71% of marketing execs said that demonstrating the value of marketing to their CEO, their CFO, and their board will either be very or extremely challenging during the upcoming year. And when you unpack that, it really starts to sit around how do we help CMOs and CFOs collectively understand the shared challenges and goals that they both have. And really, one of the things that we look at is saying, how do you link and how do we work with our clients to link marketing activities to the financial and strategic business outcomes through both the CMO and the CFO partnership? So when we look at some of the common challenges, there are a number of them. The first one is this lack of visibility. And it's a lack of visibility that not necessarily the CMO has, but certainly the broader organization can sometimes have around how campaigns and specific channels in particular contribute to the strategic objectives of the business, right? And interestingly, also how they relate to one another. Now, I've certainly been asked this question a number of times. How do you know that if you're running campaign A in the market and you're running campaign B in the market at the same time, which one is driving the result that we're seeing at the end of the month? Now, we all know that it's not one or the other. It's probably a combination of the two. The second point sits around limited standardization, specifically around KPI measurement. And when we talk about KPI measurement, it's organizational KPIs, right? So top line revenue growth, profitability at a very high level. But when you start to drill deeper down into the organization, specifically at a marketing team level, your CMO might very well share the same KPIs as the rest of their executive team. But as you get deeper into your marketing organization, you've got folk that are KPI'd on very different things, right? If you're a campaign manager sitting in the marketing team that's specifically running a campaign on a particular channel, your KPIs might not look very financial in nature. They may relate to reach, they may relate to frequency, they may relate to impressions, they may relate to a number of very important marketing metrics. But a CFO doesn't understand what engagement means in terms of revenue delivered. And so there's this opportunity that we believe exists to say, how do you start to cascade your organizational KPIs down the line, but importantly, make sure that the cascade of campaign activity KPIs are able to be linked and attributed back to those organizational KPIs. And that's not always a case of saying we're going to make the organizational KPIs the gold standard. Sometimes it does require a shift in thinking at an organizational level to say these marketing metrics actually should be measures that we look at a board level. The third point is around communicating the overall business value of marketing to business leadership. And typically, in our experience, this has been the biggest gap when you sit with your board, right? So typically, certainly in big organizations, I know that you've got to go through your budgeting process and you've got to present your budget to the board at some point. Very often, it becomes quite binary, particularly if you're talking, and I don't know whether, I don't believe we have any CFOs in the room, which is unfortunate. I would like to pick on one, but, and there was one coming from Deloitte, and I don't see him in the room. So anyway, typically, we will see a group CFO saying, we expect marketing to be X% of revenue and X% of the budget. And unless you can demonstrate to me otherwise, those numbers are not moving. Now, in our experience, most organizations benchmark themselves on a standard against peers within their own industry. And the risk with that is that it starts to commoditize the marketing budget in the minds of players within a particular organization, particularly the group CFO. Now, the rationale behind it's very straightforward. For a CFO, it means I have a baseline. I can measure myself against peers. If I'm a listed organization, analysts are going to be looking at us, this function of marketing Is it effective relative to peers? It becomes about perception, right? And managing perception. Obviously, yes, financials, but being able to say, actually, and I think the Dove example of long-term brand building over time is a very good one, because it's one of the areas that's constantly called into question. We need short-term tactics. Marketing must deliver in the month. But actually, if growth, we know, empirically comes from a combination of that as well as long-term investment, how do we start to tell that picture to a group of folk who are sitting going, we're worried about how this is going to look in terms of analysts rating us and our share price? And that is something that actually I believe CMOs need to lean into. They need to lean into that part of the conversation, and understand how to equip themselves to have that conversation, defend the role of marketing in being more than just a singular metric within the budgeting process. The next common challenge is around a willingness to take on marketing risk. And specifically, we're seeing this play out today around the implementation of technology that supports marketing, MarTech. And increasingly, the risk is not just about, are we investing more in marketing? The risk also presents organizational risk around marketing suddenly in control of tooling that used to be either the domain of an operations team or an IT team and so forth. And generally, there's a very significant initial cost of implementation around any new marketing technology that needs to be borne out over time and costed over time. And marketers struggle to be able to articulate in some instances, what is this return going to be in 5 years' time or 3 years' time or in a year's time in some instances? And then as I alluded to, there is this declining marketing budget that is perennial. Now, the reality of it is it's self-fulfilling. Unless we get this partnership right and we find the commonality, the shared goals, and we bring these together, we're going to see a picture that continues of marketing budgets continuing to be a declining component of company budgets. I think interestingly, though, one stat that I think is healthy, we are seeing marketing budgets as a percentage of revenue starting to increase. So there's some balance there. So balancing the challenges with the goals that are common, right? And I think this is where the language component really starts to take shape, which is the common goals between a CMO and a CFO are very, very aligned, particularly when it comes to maximizing value. And although that may sometimes be in trade-off between, profit in terms of short-term impact, looking at volume over the long term, in essence, both roles are in the organization to make sure that value is maximized. And so then you start to think about that as a concept, as a marketer, you start to appreciate that actually there's a lot more alignment between marketing and finance than would just ordinarily be in the course of the budgeting process. The other thing is this concept of short-term versus long-term brand equity measurement. So increasingly, we know boards are looking at the values of their brands. We know that the commercial value of a brand actually today gets measured as an asset on most company balance sheets. Certainly listed companies on a lot of the big bourses around the world, brand value is measured and brand equity is measured and assessed. And it's there as a balance sheet item. If marketers are in control of the brand, or at least the stewards of the brand for the most part, and its presence in the market, and finance folk are intrinsically concerned about the value of the brand over time, that is one extremely important point of alignment. And it becomes interesting to understand when you position this to see that there is this conflict between, well, what are we investing in the brand and so forth. And again, it comes back in my mind to some reasonably simple elements around vernacular and communication. The next common goal is around just being able to improve forecast planning. Now, I know as a marketer, one of the things that really becomes critical in any level of budget planning and activity planning is the ability to forecast what is going to happen and what's needed and what is going to happen as a result of what's needed. Now, CFOs live and die in their daily life around managing business to a forecast. So there again is an alignment here. And specifically, when I come back to the earlier point and challenge, when you start to improve the forecast planning and the consistency in measuring KPIs, you start to see a very synergistic opportunity between the CMO and CFO to collaborate. Equally, as much as it's a challenge, increasing the use of digital technologies and platforms, particularly as it relates to enhancing the customer experience, enhancing product propositions, bringing new things to market, the leveraging of tooling like artificial intelligence, automation technologies, and so forth. This is important to the CFO because, in essence, these toolings should drive some level of efficiency, should drive some level of value. Next, it's around building analytics capabilities, and this is pervasive. This is not just one point that is a goal across a CFO and a CMO. This is an organization-wide capability issue. But particularly when you're talking about the challenges and goals that I've just articulated, the ability to have the right data, good clean data, to derive timely and insightful and good quality insights from that data is critical. You need it to make good marketing decisions, and you need it to make good business decisions. And then finally, the other common goal is around reducing operational costs. So, we certainly don't we don't want the burden of an overinflated marketing organization. But equally, we know that the roll-on cost of marketing gets fed into your product proposition, your pricing proposition to your customers, and the profitability of the business overall. So the sense of being aligned as a CMO and a CFO pairing around what's the right size of my organization as a marketer, how do we work together to make sure that we are not if we're going to be lean, we're cutting out fat, but we're not cutting into the muscle. Those are very important conversations for your CMO and CFO to be aligned on. So what is the future CFO and CMO alliance? How do we build this? And what are the things that should build it? And I think there's a statement that we look at, and at least a positioning that we consider around this. And that is, you take everything that's happening in the world of the internet, since the dawn of the internet, the digital revolution, and you look at how much of the go-to-market strategy is fundamentally today owned by marketing. And arguably, it is the majority of the go-to-market strategy is owned by marketing today. And that's not just the typical historical view of marketing, create the brand, position it, launch it in the market. It's everything from the very first point of awareness to the experience that gets pulled through that organization to the transaction. And if we know that the go-to-market strategy is how a company ultimately makes money at the top line, and there is a direct tie between marketing and corporate financial performance that is fundamental to this alliance. So if there were CFOs in the room today, if you're looking to quickly and efficiently grow the top and bottom line, it's time to think about marketing as a revenue driver and not just an expense item that gets measured within percentages of bands. But in terms of practically building out this alliance, there are three key ways to forge this alliance, and I'm going to summarize them, and I'm going to invite Katherine and Beyers onto the stage to make this more practical. So the first thing is around speaking a shared language. The second piece is around setting mutually beneficial goals. And the third is around building trust within the relationship to drive transformation. And so speaking a shared language really boils down to really having a strong CMO and CFO collaboration that hinges on the CFO thoroughly understanding consumer demand and the business objectives of marketing initiatives. Now, typically, the CFO is saying, marketing, you need to speak my language. That is true, but it's equally true that the CFO needs to be able to understand and speak the language of marketing. It's incumbent on us as marketers to educate our CFO colleagues, right? If anyone can articulate it, we probably can best. Equally, a CMO needs to think quantitatively and be able to build data-based arguments. So when you're sitting in front of the board and they're asking, why do you need the extra 7% on this line? You need to be able to build an argument that's data-based, fact-based, quantitative, and actually just is able to kind of push through the noise of it's subjective. The next is about communicating the role and impact technology makes, whether it's from lead generation, post-sale servicing, how we measure and refine technology stacks, and so forth. And then making use of advanced measurement and technology that builds compelling investment cases, right? So these are all tactics that you can use to build that shared common language between a CMO and a CFO and become a power pair. When you're sitting in the boardroom, you actually want the CFO to be rooting in your corner as you're delivering that budget presentation. Around setting mutually beneficial goals, there's three key things, right? Understand each other's core metrics to convert. What are the shared motivations and the shared objectives that drive growth? And what are the cross-departmental KPIs that between the CMO and the CFO you need to either collectively monitor or drive, right? And sometimes those KPIs don't even sit within marketing or the CFO's domain. They may sit within ops, product, and so forth. But as a pairing, you can influence that quite significantly. CMOs also need to be able to articulate the financial effectiveness of their annual marketing plans, specifically when it comes to media channels and campaigns. And I think what we just saw from Zitra is really interesting, right? Because you need a very quantitative level of capability to really demonstrate what is being delivered out of particular media channels. If you want to grow the budget, you've got to be able to really demonstrate what's coming through. And then finally, it's around breaking down the strategic silos, right? And think about how you align the go-to-market teams and departments potentially under one person. And increasingly, we are seeing this play out in marketing organizations where you're putting customer experience at the center, and we're seeing the elevation of marketing to ownership of the customer, right? And the advent of the chief customer officer role, chief marketing officer role is becoming more and more blurred as we go forward. And then the next piece is around building trust. And this is really, as marketers, something that we should be quite good at, right? It's building trust from a relationship perspective that helps forward the agenda of transformation. This does require some soft skills that we are probably reasonably good at, but we need our CFO colleagues to be good at as well. As I've demonstrated, they're very common challenges and very common goals. Having empathy for the differing sort of points of view around that is important. The ability to work together around experimenting, brainstorming, adopting things, adopting a test and learn mindset is also very important. And then building on the relationship of trust ultimately should drive even more collaboration and even more risk acceptance within the marketing sphere. And then finally, I think the mutual goals and relationship of trust should really also unlock with the CMO and CFO the ability to jointly influence company-wide innovation or experimentation, right, beyond typical budget constraints. And this would look typically like, we're going to take marketing's position on testing a new segment or testing a new audience or testing a new product altogether. And we're going to do that. We're going to drive that agenda collectively as the CMO and the CFO. Bringing these three things together there's one aspect that we believe fundamentally hooks everything I've just described into practical reality for your CMO and your CFO. And that's looking at the customer experience that gets delivered by the organization. When you put customer experience at the core, you start to see, and you define customer experience as a source of both top and bottom line growth, you start to see very interesting things. Now, one of the tricks here is that you do need to make sure that you are ensuring that departments play in their swim lanes when it comes to the customer experience. And that comes down to customer journey mapping and so forth. And then finally, being able to quantify the tech investments required to efficiently elevate the customer experience. So in closing of this content, I hope that you kind of get a sense that this power alliance is actually, it's not foreign, and that there's a lot of commonality. And I hope that everyone is able to today go back and have a really good, frank conversation with your CFO around what they should be doing to support you and how you can support them better around those common goals. It'd be great now for Beyers and Katherine to join on stage, and we can hear some practical, real-life examples from CMOs that are in the hot seat. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, Katherine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Katherine Madley from Massmart, and I have the privilege of looking after Builders, Game, Macro, and our family of cash and carry brands.
Fantastic. Welcome to this MMA. Beyers?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Beyers from Merwe, CMO for PEP. We're excited to spend the morning with you.
Awesome. So, one open question, and then we'll get into some practical examples. Katherine, maybe you could describe what's your relationship like with your CFO?
So my business has some CFOs in the center of the business, and it also has some what I call banner CFOs in Builders, Game, Macro, and cash and carry. And fortunately, I have an excellent relationship with the CFOs. I think it's just maybe a bit of luck as well that I have that relationship with them. But they also do try very hard to understand the marketing. And I do present budgets and strategies and plans with a lot of numbers and graphs, which they love.
Wonderful. So you've got a winning recipe.
Yeah.
And Beyers, just...
I absolutely love my CFO. So we're great friends. So you have to. So I think it definitely is a journey. You have to build that relationship, and like Katherine just mentioned, it's you have to find a common like happy place in the middle, and I think that's where the magic happens. So it's not like a power battle, and the one needs to win this war. It's how we can do it together. And in my case, in our case, putting the customer at the center is really helped. So it's not a marketing finance conversation; it's a customer conversation, and that's really, I've made it. That angle has improved our relationship a lot.
Wonderful. If you had to think about the hardest conversation you've had to have in recent times with your CFO or your other C-suite, what does it look like? And I guess what has that challenge been, and how have you overcome it? And maybe some practical examples.
Yeah, so I think it's also important in our sphere of business. I'm talking retail here. Retail CFOs typically know a lot more about marketing than other industries. They also understand the impact of not doing sufficient work, how that contracts the brand.
Yeah.
So they understand that, and they understand marketing in retail is very much in a different format is what it is in other industries. And I come from a financial services background, so I know from my banking days and my investment days that was a very different kind of conversation relative to my retail days. I think for many years, in the early part of my career and the battle to explain brand efficacy was the hardest part. So if you split the strategy into the defensive and the offensive, that was tough. But the breakthrough came when Peter Field and Les Barnett wrote the long and the short of it 10 years ago. That piece of work was a breakthrough piece of work where they evidenced the effect of brand building in the long term. So that has helped marketers globally to have that conversation with CFOs, because it is fact-based evidence, it is qualitative and quantitative techniques, and it's a long form. And then Deloitte, Nielsen's, and others have also done loads and loads of work which help back up the evidence required for brand building work.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think from our side, we can say the impact piece is probably where, and Diana also spoke about it earlier, is like for PEP, it's a relatively new space. So some of the audience will know we absolutely love product and price, and we put a red price flash onto everything. So, and the CMOs and the CFOs are very comfortable with that space, because you measure the impact, you measure the sales, and you can quantify your spend. And then moving into the impact world, which we know is from a marketing perspective or from a customer perspective, the right investment, right place to go. But it was quite a journey to align on the measurement, align on it before you start, because the mistakes we've made is we would run a big campaign which is not a sales-driven campaign, and get to the end, and then we argue the measurement. So, and that was quite a big lesson for us. It's like start up front, align with your team. It's not only the CFO, it's the entire Exco team, and the business needs to be well aligned. Like, what are you trying to achieve here? And then we measure it. So that's our journey, and that's really worked for us.
Wonderful. And maybe just double clicking a bit on the measurement topic, because I think it's one of the areas certainly that having alignment is important, but it's equally one of the areas where the language and the vernacular and the can be often misaligned, right? How are you overcoming that? So you just mentioned around being clear up front, but how do you bridge that gap in maybe the example I gave around, you've got someone that's in your team that's working incredibly hard and diligently, but their KPIs sit within marketing sort of metrics, and
I think you will always have you will have that. So at the end, the individual needs to have a very clear KPI, but way up front in the why, you have to align on the why and the business why on it. Then the company needs to be very clear on what we want to achieve for, in our instance, for PEP, and then department, and then the individual. And I think if you go along that route and you get to the individual's KPIs, then it's very clear. It all adds back up to the overall goal set, and it's not a digital person who's running a TikTok campaign and the CFO is asking you what's going on? Will dancing people actually give me a return on my investment? So you actually
always.
So the best advice is get your CFO to be on TikTok. It really helps. But you must make sure that aligns at the end, and then that works.
So, Katherine, within your organization, obviously multi-brands, very operational as a retailer. The role of technology and your influence in terms of driving technology innovation in the business. How, maybe give us some perspectives in terms of, sorry, maybe I should contextualize. I know that you've invested heavily in marketing technologies and marketing technology capabilities within the organization. How have you navigated that, and how have you managed to sort of, achieve some success where I think some other marketers have probably fallen a bit short?
Yeah, so very fortunate to have expert technology, and being 100% owned by Walmart, they've lent us and given us a lot of expert tools to use. So we are well able to articulate what the customer wants and needs. And to Beyers' point, we can share that with Exco and the rest of the team, because we can see what customers want and need, and then we can serve them accordingly. And that's all because of technology, access to huge sample sizes at our fingertips, being able to ask customers and getting results in 24 hours.
Yeah.
The landscape has changed drastically. In the old days, you'd have to go through long focus groups, and it would take months and months to work out, certain quality, certain pieces of direction. Now it's really at your fingertips, and we all have listening tools which help us tremendously make good decisions.
Awesome. Beyers, in the world of PEP, you today as a business operate almost a singular channel. You're almost a singular channel business, right? PEP stores are where it all happens. What's your biggest challenge in terms of influencing the customer experience, and how are you working with your CFO to kind of really shape that agenda?
So I think for us, it's been a journey where we started in the in quite a rural footprint, and you mentioned the store footprint, so which is the bulk of our investment goes into stores. And as that change over time, where the store is no longer the only single point of contact, and you start talking about e-commerce and other channels, that is again quite a mind shift internally from a internal point of view. So we all aligned on it's not a one size fits all, and you can't take one channel and think what we did in the store will also a physical store will also do you well on an online store, and I know you can also add to that. So the challenge is to align then on the new journey and make sure everyone is clear that we are evolving, and you can't be a brand that just think a store is gonna be your place forever. It's store and many other touch points. So that is a bit of a challenge, because your measurements can be all over and it can be too much. And we've also been there with, especially in the digital space, you absolutely kill people with information.
Yeah.
So to make sure you align on what's the things that you're going to pull out and you will all look at as measures of success. For me, that really helped, because otherwise you'll drown. And back to the individual might have a lot more information to look at, but if you go up to a company level, you need to be very well aligned on those 2 or 3 the clear KPIs that you put down.
Awesome. Final piece of advice that you can give to our fellow marketers in the room, particularly around, you both described having wonderful relationships with your CFOs. What is your individual winning formulas that you share with our audience today?
So I think it's really important to report weekly with the stakeholders. So you can't sit silent at all. So I personally write to the stakeholders every week with the reports. What has happened in my brands? What's working? What's not working? Very simple and crisp. People don't have time to read long emails with lots of slides. They don't. So you've got to say, here's 3 minutes of your time so that you can see clearly what's going on in the business, and then I also show the business what's planned. So it's a looking back and a looking forward. So a lot of trust and respect is built through everybody, not just the CFO.
Yeah.
Through that ability to do that and do that properly and effectively with the clear KPIs. So I think that's very very important. And then it's important to build that budget together.
Yeah.
So if you build it together, because we're all chasing the same goals at the end of the day, that's the second piece of advice. It always borrow Heidi's words. It takes a village. It takes a village to raise a brand, and it takes a village to raise a budget. So if you do it together, you can do it strongly.
Very, very, very wise.
So for me, that advice is like to unlock the opportunity. I really think it's about simplicity. So the simpler you can make it, and it's not a dummy guide, but it's just the important things that needs to be communicated to all the different levels in your organization is key, because the amount of information we deal with, and it's also linking to your point, it is a lot. So the simpler you can make it, and it's not, my advice is actually, this is quite a strong, but get rid of the word marketing and put customer there. Because if you put marketing down, there's this department silo view where, and we just had an ExCo meeting now, and we had a 3-hour discussion on customer, but it was just customer. It's not marketing's view. It was like customer information, talking about the customer data that you have. And that's the privilege we have. We've got amazing information that will lead the conversation. So start with that. So it's not your point of view, it's the customer's point of view. And then you can just build on that. So I think that for me as the future of where we're going is really a customer focused and that's how you'll get your impact.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.